Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmaracharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Very good. Please be seated. Parameshwara. Good. Very good. Excuse me. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvisha vahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome back. Nice to see you all this morning. Also, welcome to our many students watching online. We continue our study of chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Vibhaga, the separation or division of the Daiva Sampat, divine qualities, and Asura Sampat, the so-called demonic qualities. We'll be discussing that shortly. Let's begin our recitation with verse 5. And as always, as I'm chanting, read the translation and then repeat after me. Daivi Sampad Vimokshaya, Daivi Sampad Vimokshaya, Nibandhaya Surimata, Nibandhaya Surimata, Ma Shucha Samparam Daivim, Ma Shucha Samparam Daivim, Abhijato si Pandava, Abhijato si Pandava, Dvau Bhuta Sargau Lokesman, Dvau Bhuta Sargau Lokesman, Daivaha Surahevacha, Daivaha Surahevacha, Daivo Vistarasha Prokta, Daivo Vistarasha Prokta, Asuram Partha Meshunu, Asuram Partha Meshunu, Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha, Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha, Janana vidurasuraha, Janana vidurasuraha, Na shaucham napi cha charo, Na shaucham napi cha charo, Na satyam teshu vidyate, Na satyam teshu vidyate, Asatvam apratishtamte, Asatyam apratishtamte, Jagarahuranishwaram, Jagarahuranishwaram, Paraspara, Aparaspara Sambhutam, Aparaspara Sambhutam, Kyamanyat Kama Haitukam, Kyamanyat Kama Haitukam, Etam Drishtimavashtabhya, Etam Drishtimavashtabhya, Nashtatmanulpabuddhayaha, Nashtatmanulpabuddhayaha, Prabhavantyugra karmanaha, Prabhavantyugra karmanaha, Kshayaya jagato hitaha, Kshayaya jagato hitaha, Kamamashrit dushpuram, kamamashritya dushpuram, dambhamanamaranvitaha, dambhamanamaranvitaha, mohad grahitva sadgrahan, mohad grahitva sadgrahan, pravartante suchivrataha, pravartante suchivrataha. Very good. So, back to where we left off. Here we see a very clear description of what this chapter is about. Daivi sampat vimokshaya, divine traits lead you on a path of spiritual growth, whereas nibandaya asurim, the so-called demonic traits, keep you in a state of bondage, keep you in a state of suffering here in worldly life. So just to recall one point from last week's class, and that is, these traits are not for the sake of making judgments about others or judgments about yourself. For example, if you take these teachings and then start judging the people in your life, oh, she's very asuric, oh, he is very daiva, if you've missed the point of this chapter entirely. Even for yourself. If you look at yourself and say, oh, why am I doing that? Why am I like that? I'm like an asura. That too is harmful. That doesn't help you on your path of spiritual growth. Putting yourself down again and again is harmful. So let's be very clear. These teachings are not for judging others. These teachings are not for judging yourself. These teachings are for guiding you on an ongoing path of spiritual growth. And in particular, these teachings are meant to make you more aware of the consequences of raga and dvesha. This is one of the main teachings of Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, and perhaps it's one of the reasons the Bhagavad Gita is so widely studied, and that is, raga and dvesha are indeed the biggest obstacle to spiritual growth. Raga, as we've discussed before, is a compulsion to chase after what you want. Dvesha is a compulsion to run away from what you don't want. This raga and dvesha destroys lives. Think about it. When people are motivated by raga and dvesha, lives get destroyed. And certainly it's more than enough to be an obstacle to spiritual growth. So we'll be reflecting on this raga dvesha as we continue. We'll pardon, up the volume. My voice is a little funny. Okay. So we'll proceed with the next verse. Dvau bhuta sargau lokesmen, dvau bhuta sargau lokesmen, daivaha suraheva cha, daivaha suraheva cha, daivo vistarasha prokta, daivo vistarasha prokta, asuram partha me shrunu, asuram partha me shrunu. Asmin loke, in this world, dvau bhuta sargau, dvau two. There are two kinds of bhuta sargau, two kinds of creatures that have been created. And what are those two kinds, those two categories? That's what this whole chapter is about. They are daiva, those that have divine qualities, and asura, those who have asuric tendencies. Daivaha vistarashaha proktaha. This is a transition to the next part of the chapter. Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that the daivaha, the divine qualities, have already been proktaha, taught. Taught how? Vistarashaha, in some detail. So in the first 3 verses, notice the weight. First 3 verses we saw last week, divine qualities. 1 verse on demonic qualities. In Sri Krishna's view, that demonic quality part needs more elaboration. So he says that already we've discussed these divine qualities. And then he says, Partha, O Arjuna, now asuram, about those demonic qualities, me shunu, listen to me as I teach you about those demonic qualities. And you'll see there's quite an extensive discussion about this, and for a good reason. It's what do they say? Know thy enemy. And enemy here is the enemy within you. That, in fact, raga and dvesha are the enemies, the ones that compel you sometimes to do adharmic things. Know thy enemy. It's the root cause of all this problem. And just like medical doctors spend a lot of time studying pathology, studying disease. And that may seem counterintuitive. Shouldn't they discover treatment? Shouldn't medical people study more treatments? Of course they do, extensively study treatments, but if they don't study pathology sufficiently, if they don't understand illness and disease properly, how can they teach, how can they cure you? So it's crucial for a doctor to understand illness and disease. It's crucial for a spiritual seeker to understand these so-called demonic traits, and that's what we see next, quite extensively. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha, pravrittim cha nivrittim cha, janana vidurasuraha, janana vidurasuraha, na shaucham napi cha charo, na shaucham napi cha charo, na satyam teshu vidyate, na satyam teshu vidyate. In the second line, asuraha janaha. The people, janaha, the people who are asuraha, who have these so-called demonic traits. What about them? Na viduhu. They do not understand. What do they understand? In the first line, pravrittim and nivrittim. Here, pravritti means what you should do. Nivritti means what you shouldn't do. So he says that those with asuric traits can't discern what should be done and what should not be done. And instead of saying they don't know, I think we can treat that in a little bit more subtle way. They know, but their thinking gets distorted. Now, maybe the best example, in fact, there's a famous verse attributed to Duryodhana in the Mahabharata, who says, Dharmam cha janami, I know what is dharma, na cha me pravrittihi, but I have no inclination to follow that dharma. Adharmam cha janami, I also know what is adharma, na cha me nivrittihi, but I have no disinclination to avoid doing that adharma. So here, Duryodhana admits he knows what is dharma and adharma. He knows what is right and wrong. He can't keep himself on the path of dharma. Why? You can answer that question based on their introduction. Raga and dvesha. That's why we call them compulsions. They're usually translated as likes and dislikes and things like that, but to call them likes and dislikes doesn't characterize them at all. Likes and dislikes sounds pretty innocuous, right? You say, I like tomatoes. I don't like eggplant. So what? No consequence at all. The point I'm making, to call raga and dvesha likes and dislikes kind of gives them a free pass. It fails to recognize the severity of the problem caused by raga and dvesha. That's why you'll hear me translate them again and again as compulsions. Compulsivity here is the problem. And compulsivity is what overwhelms your judgment. And that's what happens to Duryodhana, right? He says, I know what is right, but I can't follow it. Why? His thinking gets overwhelmed by raga, I think in previous classes I've called raga and dvesha like two nasty bosses in your mind, forcing you to do things that you may or may not want to do. They're bossing you around. They're compelling you. So that is Duryodhana's problem. That is everyone's problem. And let me give a very simple but accurate example. How many times have you debated doing something and you have some mixed feelings about it because it's not exactly the right thing to do? It's a little bit in that gray zone between dharma and adharma. So therefore you say, well, just this once. Have you ever said that? Most people have. Those three words are evidence of raga dvesha. Because when you say just this once, you already acknowledge the fact that what you're about to do is not the right thing to do. If it were the right thing to do, you wouldn't tell yourself just this once. You know it's the wrong thing to do, but then you do it anyway. And not only that, you give yourself an excuse that just this once I'll do it. And it's also a lame excuse, because the fact that you do it once makes you more inclined to do it again and again. So it's not even a good excuse. It's a lame excuse. This is the consequence of raga dvesha. This is the human condition. Everyone, without exception, deals with raga and dvesha, which is why Sri Krishna spends so much time in the Bhagavad Gita dealing with this problem. So, this is the problem here, that the asuric people, the one with the so-called demonic traits, he says they don't understand, but I think a more subtle understanding would be their understanding gets perverted by raga dvesha. And this is not it's a huge topic, but look at this. Our intellect is supposed to keep us on the right track. We're supposed to discern with our intellect the difference between what's right and what's wrong. But that intellect, and the language I've used before is significant. I've said your intellect gets hijacked by raga dvesha. And when your intellect is hijacked by raga dvesha, instead of using your intellect to keep yourself on the right track, you use intellect to make excuses for doing the wrong thing. Okay, enough said. Sri Krishna continues about those people with demonic traits. He says, na shaucham, they have no purity. Na api cha acharaha, achara, conduct, and here it means good conduct. They don't have good conduct. And teshu, in them, satyam na vidyate, there's no truthfulness in them. We've discussed each of these in the prior verses on the daiva sampat. So what Sri Krishna is simply saying here is they completely lack the daiva sampat. He gives 3 examples of divine qualities that they lack. Let's continue. Asatyam apratishtham te asatyam apratishtam te jagarahuranishwaram jagarahuranishwaram aparasparasambhutam kimanyat kama haitukam kinamyat kama haitukam. You have to connect the words te and the second line ahuhu in the middle. Te, they who, those with demonic traits, they ahuhu, they say. What do they say? That Jagat, the world, is anishwaram, is godless, literally godless. The world is godless, which means they reject the existence of an Ishvara who creates, sustains, and eventually destroys the world. They reject that Ishvara. They reject that Ishvara. These first two words I've taken as adverbs. They reject that Ishvara asatyam, falsely, and they reject that Ishvara apratishtam, without basis. But I checked the commentary. He doesn't take them as adverbs. He takes them as adjectives to Jagat. So in that interpretation, they consider the world to be anishvaram, godless. They consider the world to be asatyam, unreal, in the sense that it doesn't have a real cause. Ishvara is a reality. So if you deny the reality of the cause, you deny the reality of the effect. This is Vedantic logic. So therefore they say that the world is asatyam, it's unreal, and it is apratishtam, the world has no basis. The basis, the foundation, of course, is Ishvara. So the world is godless, the world has no creator. And then, of course, now if they say that the world has no creator, then they have to explain, well, then how did it come about? Well, they have an explanation for that. Aparaspara sambhutam. The world was sambhutam, created from... sambhutam. The world was assembled, not created. The world was assembled of what? Aparaspara, from the mutual union. And there are two ways of interpreting this. A very technical way of interpreting this, which I actually quite like, is the world was assembled from the combination of elements. That's exactly what modern science teaches us, that the world is God. Not, by the way, not all scientists are atheists. In fact, I have a feeling a great many scientists are deeply religious. But suppose there's a scientist who's also a materialist, an atheist, one who rejects the Ishvara. Not all scientists are like that, but suppose there is a scientist who completely rejects the possibility that there is some kind of divine source because of which this universe evolved. Well, that scientist will tell you that the universe began in fact, he'll be very precise. This world began 14.75 billion years ago. They like to be precise. And it began with the Big Bang. The Big Bang was this highly energetic explosion, and as that energy cooled down, so to speak, it began to form particles. Eventually, those particles formed atoms, like hydrogen, and they formed more complex particles, like helium, and those particles combined into suns, and the suns grew hot, the suns exploded, and those exploding suns created all the heavier elements. This is pure science. This is what they teach. And it's correct. There's no reason to argue with it, any of it. All the heavy elements that exist were created in exploding stars. We know this very well. and which leads to the very interesting observation, your body and my body are made of elements produced by exploding stars. Science, fact, not fiction. Anyway, that's not our topic. Our topic here is that the very materialistic or atheistic scientists would say that we all exist just by the combination of all these elements. So you got a lot of oxygen and hydrogen and carbon and all of that, and it's all stuck together in a very intelligent way, and that allows you to be you and allows me to be me. So that is the explanation given by there's a doctrine called scientific materialism. Materialism is a doctrine that says there is no divinity, there's nothing out there, and it is scientific, based on science. That's one, I think, significant interpretation, but there's a more common, and I think both interpretations are good. There's a more common interpretation based on the next line, that the world is born on this mutual union, and the world is Kama haitukam. The world is, this mutual union is haitukam, has the cause of kama, desire. What is he referring to? He's referring specifically to the sexual desire of a man and woman who then procreate. So he's saying here that the universe, all of us exist. What a comment. We all exist because of sexual desire. That's what he says. And, we're mature enough, we understand that to some extent it's absolutely true, but it's being represented as the whole truth here. That's all it is. There's nothing more than sexual desire. Kimanyat, what else could it be? It is just sexual. So it's a very, very narrow perspective on life. And truthfully, a very unhealthy perspective on life. Whenever we narrow our view, we shut ourselves off to many other ways of thinking which are far more beneficial. In fact, that's exactly what Sri Krishna will say in the next verse. So let's see that. Etam drishtam avashtabhya, etam drishtam avashtabhya, nashtatmanolpabuddhayaha, nashtatmanolpabuddhayaha, prabhavantyugrakarmanaha, prabhavantyugrakarmanaha, kshayaya jagato hitaha, kshayaya jagato hitaha, etam drishtam avashtabhya. Avashtabhya, holding on, clinging to. Etam drishtam, clinging to this view. What view? The view described in the prior verse, the view of scientific materialism. We're all just we're combinations of elements that got stuck together in the right order. Therefore, we are sentient beings. How short-sighted is that? Or the alternative here, we are all the product of sexual desire. So these very narrow perspectives on life. So there are many who cling to these narrow views. Who are they? Nashta atmanaha. Here atma refers to mind. Their minds are nashta. Literally destroyed, but that's kind of a strong word. Damaged. Damaged in some way that makes them incapable of having an open mind. There is so much unreasonable propaganda that you'll find on the internet and on media today I mean, absolutely ridiculous statements being made. How could people make, and their statements, yeah, actually, I think this needs to be discussed. Let me come back to it. Let's see this verse, and I want to come back to that point. So these people, their minds are nashta, they're damaged somehow. We'll talk about how that gets damaged. And they're also alpa buddhayaha. They have limited intellects. Limited, that's that narrowness of view again. We have so much that we can learn from others. One of the hazards in life is to think that we know enough. We are wise enough. After all, we've come to this advanced age in life. We're old enough now. We're not children. I know what I need to know, so don't tell me anything. There's a pride, an unhealthy pride in that perspective. I already know what's going on. Don't tell me. Instead, don't tell me. That's the problem of shutting yourself off from other ideas. And so many people do this when they hear ideas that are contrary to what they already believe to be true, they just shut you out. This is the rigidity. That word avashtabhya suggests that rigidity of thinking. I know what it is. I know what's going on. I'm intelligent. So don't tell me anything that's contrary to what I already know to be true. I have to refer to these what's now aptly called culture wars. And I get a lot of news, all from, I don't watch TV, but from the internet. I get a lot of news. And I watch all of this stuff going on with the culture wars. And you don't have to agree with me, because this is not Vedanta, this is my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, these culture wars are one of the worst things to happen to this country in a long time. Because, and on both sides, I'm not saying this side is wrong and this side is right. They're both sides. The moment you have a war, you have all of this conflict and the consequences of that conflict. And the basis for this culture war is both sides say, I'm right and you're wrong, and there's no effort to understand each other. You know, this is the most typical thing. This goes on all the time in a family, even between spouses. So many times, spouses are so busy shouting at each other that no one can listen. As long as you're shouting, who's listening, right? Well, that goes on at every level. And so sadly, it sometimes goes on between spouses. It certainly goes on in many, many contexts. And that seems to be what's going on in these so-called culture wars. The right is shouting at the left is shouting at the right. Everyone is shouting. No one is listening. No one is trying to solve the problems. No one is trying to heal this divisiveness. So for these reasons, I think it's really a huge problem. And that's suggested by Sri Krishna in this verse. So avashtabhya, holding on to your position. Nashtatmanaha, and not considering any other possibility. Alpa buddhayaha, having your perspective so limited that you only accept a certain thing as being true, and you reject the possibility that you might be wrong. So this looks like the underlying basis for all these culture wars. Anyway, such people, now Sri Krishna goes on further, Such people, end of the third line, such people are ugra karmanaha. They are capable of ugra karma, of fierce deeds, like shouting. By the way, shouting, let's just call it for what it is. Shouting is himsa. It causes harm, right? If you're shouting, are you making a point? No. Shouting is the verbal equivalent of striking someone. Is that not so? If you want to convince someone, does shouting help or hurt? Right? Shouting certainly doesn't help. So if you're shouting, it's not part of the argument. What is it? It's the verbal equivalent to physically striking the person who disagrees with you. There's no place for this shouting. It is himsa, and as you all know, the main principle of dharma in the Hindu tradition is ahimsa. Ahimsa paramo dharma. You've all heard many times. The main principle of dharma is don't hurt. And don't hurt includes don't hurt with your tongue. Turns out for most people, the weapon they wield most viciously is that tongue. Causes harm. So therefore, these people are ugra karmanaha. They're capable of these fierce deeds. And first word, prabhavanti, they become, last word, ahitaha, enemies. They become enemies for whom? Jagataha, for the world. They become enemies of the world, kshayaya, causing the decline of the world, causing harm to the world. And in a very simple way. Shouting is himsa, it causes harm. Culture wars, no matter what side you're on, to fight a war is himsa, it causes harm. Kshaya. Kshaya means decay, and harm to a society is kshaya. So because of these so-called demonic traits, these people become ugra karmanaha. They become capable of harmful deeds, and they cause harm. Then, kamamashritya dushpuram, kamamashritya dushpuram, dambhamanamanvitaha, dambhamanamanvitaha, mohad grahitva sadgrahan, mohad grahitva sadgrahan, pravartante suchivrataha, pravartante suchivrataha, ashritya, kind of almost the same as that avashtabhya in the prior verse. Holding on to, in this case, I would say more overcome by kamam, desire. Overwhelmed by desire. Remember the two bosses, Raga and Dvesha. Mr. Raga, why not? Mr. Raga, Ms. Dvesha. There are plenty of female bosses today. So, anyway, a boss is a boss. You don't want to be bossed around, whoever it is, male or female, whatever. Anyway, so kamam ashritya, overcome by desire which is dushpuram, difficult to fulfill. I go a step further. In fact, Sri Krishna earlier in the Bhagavad Gita says, desires are not difficult to fulfill, desires are impossible to fulfill, because you fulfill one desire and you get another and another and another. Sri Krishna said earlier, he says it's like putting wood in a fire. When will the fire have enough wood? It'll simply consume more and more and more. As you put fuel in that fire, desires are the same. Satisfying desires is like putting fuel in the fire. There's no satiation possible through fulfilling your desires. Can I say that again? This is such an important principle that people don't think about. What do you want? You want contentment. Contentment equals satiation, right? Can your desires be satiated by fulfilling them one at a time? Got it? So it's a lousy strategy for life. If you want contentment, the way to gain contentment is not by satisfying individual desires. The way to find contentment is what we're doing right now. Okay, so these people overwhelmed by insatiable desires, these people are dambha, mana, mada, anvitaha. These people are full, anvita, these people are full of dambha, hypocrisy, mana, pride, and mada, lust is a good translation in this context. That thirst for something, where whenever your thinking gets perverted, we spoke before about intellect getting perverted. That's what this word mada. Infatuation. I like that translation best. Infatuation. So these are describing, obviously, the asura sampat, the so-called demonic qualities. And what is the consequence of these demonic qualities? Those that have those demonic qualities, middle of the next line, grahitva, holding on to asad grahan, holding on to asat, wrong, graha, conclusions. Holding on to false conclusions. Why? Mohat, out of ignorance, out of having their minds shut and having their thinking perverted due to raga dvesha. What about these people? Pravartante, they act in the world driven by, and they are ashuchi vrata, they act in the world based on vrata, here commitment, not vow. The intention, that's a good translation. They have intentions which are ashuchi, impure. What does it mean, impure intention, impure intent? I think in a very fundamental sense, to act for your own sake, ignoring the welfare of others. There are two, you can't, we need both parts to that. To act on your own sake and ignore others. That's what we call selfishness. And to be focused on your own, to fulfill your needs, your legitimate needs in life is necessary. You need a job, you need to work and to enjoy some of the pleasures of life. There's no harm in it. That's not what we're talking about here. Because of these demonic traits, because of the overwhelming force, compulsive force of raga dvesha, you become insensitive, not you, but those with these demonic traits, excuse me, become, as a result of these demonic traits, they become insensitive to the needs of others and then focus only on their own needs. The problem is clear. Then, chintama parimeyancha, chintama parimeyancha, pralayantamupashrataha, pralayantamupashrataha, kamopabhoga parama, kamopabhoga parama, etavarati nishchataha, etavarati nishchataha. start in the second half. Kama upabhoga paramaha. Nicely said. They are paramaha, fixated on what? Upabhoga, enjoyment of kama, whatever they desire, whatever they enjoy. Fixated, that paramaha. And that suggests when you're fixated on fulfilling your own desires, that fixation can make you insensitive to the needs of others. This is a huge problem. There's nothing wrong with being successful in life. There's nothing wrong with being successful in your profession and being driven to do whatever you want. There's nothing wrong so long as you are tethered, so to speak, in dharma. And what that means is there's no problem in striving for success so long as you continue to be sensitive to the needs of others, especially family members. So that's the message here. Here we're talking about those who are not like that. People who are insensitive to the needs of others, people who are fixated on their own desires, fixated, paramaha. And what about them? Etavat iti nishchataha. They nishchataha, they have a firm conclusion. What is a firm conclusion? Etavat iti. This is the thing to do. The more I work, the more I get. The more I strive, the more I get. Who cares about anyone else? Who cares about anything else? What is it? They call this a me-first philosophy. Not me first. Me first means you second. Already that sounds a little bit problematic, but this is worse than me first. This is only me. You don't even rate as second. So me first, you second. Okay, there's some hope, at least you're second. But this is not me first, you second. This is only me. Who cares about you? This is the asura sampat and consequences of that. And this word etavat, iti, this idea that life, this expression suggests this very simplistic, materialistic view of life, and that is the purpose of life is to get as much pleasure as you can. The purpose of life is to avoid as much suffering as you can. Etavaditi, that's all it is. And that is such a limited view of life. Again, to get as much pleasure for whom? Not me first, only me. To avoid suffering for whom? Not me first, only me. That's what Sri Krishna is criticizing here. So, nishchataha, people who have that orientation, etavarati, this is all it is. There's nothing more to be done in life. What about them? Now go back to the beginning. Chintam aparimeyam, and you have to connect it to ashritaha at the end of the second line. Such people become ashritaha, overwhelmed by, afflicted by chintam, worries. How many worries? Aparimeyam, countless worries. They are afflicted by countless worries, pralayantam, until they die. Boy, what a grim assessment. These people with demonic traits are subject to countless worries which will plague them, afflict them as long as they live. Now, what is the basis for that statement? Suppose you have that me first philosophy, or the only me philosophy. You live your life with this only me philosophy, which means you have to get as much pleasure as you can, you have to avoid as much suffering as you can, and you don't care about anyone else but yourself. Okay, here's the question. Can we avoid suffering in life? This person's goal is to avoid suffering. How effective can we be in avoiding suffering in life? To a great extent we can, but to a great extent we can't. There are so many factors in life over which we have no control, and if you are fixated on avoiding suffering by controlling all those factors, what a funny expression came into my mind. You're waging war on cause and effect. Cause and effect is a basic principle of existence. To wage war means you're not satisfied with cause and effect. You want the world to be the way you want it. It's like a 2-year-old, right? Mom says, no, you've had enough cookies. And the 2-year-old says, but I want more cookies. Now, when a 2-year-old behaves that way, we understand, at least parents understand, hopefully. But when an adult has that perspective, suppose a person has a lot of money invested in a certain stock, and the stock goes down. That stock goes down for 1,000 reasons, but this person is angry. Angry why? Can't control those thousands of reasons that make the stock go down. This person can't control the price of the stock. This person is incapable of avoiding this financial loss, incapable of avoiding suffering due to financial loss. And look at this. Suppose this person, just to connect to the verse, suppose this person has thousands of stocks, thousands of investments. By the way, if you have lots of investments, that's good. Honestly, it's a good thing. But there's a possible issue here. And that is, if you are fixated on each of those 1,000 investments, how will you feel? There are people who wake up in the morning. I don't think any of you are like this, but there are people who wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is they turn on the news to find out what the stock market is doing. That's the first thing, because they want to know how their investments are doing. If you have thousands of investments, you have thousands of worries. This is what Sri Krishna is saying. And again, there's nothing wrong with having investments. There's something wrong if you're fixated on them. If you think your contentment in life is assured through your investments, that's the problem. Do you see the difference? Investments are not the problem. But the wrong conclusion that your investments will buy you contentment, that's the problem. Investments are not the problem. That wrong conclusion. Investments can buy me contentment. That is the problem. So these people are tortured by their worldly concerns. And is that here? Yeah. Oh, I did. Yeah, I thought I made that point here. I wrote it down. And here's a often unrecognized problem of life. And it was recognized even in ancient times. They called it the problem of yoga and kshema. Here, yoga has nothing to do with spiritual life. Here, yoga has more of a root meaning. Yoga, combining, getting, joining. Yoga means acquisition, period. Acquiring. Yoga means acquiring. Kshema means taking care of things. And this principle then is whatever you have gained, yoga, you have to take care of, kshema, which means the more you have, the more you have to take care of. For example, many of you have gone through this. You have a small home, then you move into this really big home. And you discover that the bigger the house is, the more maintenance it requires, more things break down in the house. And if you have two houses, you have twice as many problems. Many people have a vacation home, or a third home, or a fourth home, or a third car, or a fourth car. The point is, the more you have, the more you have to take care of. Now, if you have a healthy attitude towards all of that, it's okay. But if you have this kind of attitude, these demonic traits, then the more you have, the more you worry about. That doesn't sound like a formula for contentment. But consider for just a moment the irony. So many people think that contentment is gained through getting more and more and more. That's a conventional way of thinking, right? I get this, I get this, I get this. The more goodies I get in life, the more, let's call them luxuries. I think that's a more accurate way. The more luxuries I acquire in life, the more I can enjoy my life. And certainly there are many luxuries that deserve to be enjoyed, but look at this irony. Each luxury you possess, first of all, costs a lot of money, which has a consequence. Secondly, it has to be taken care of. It'll break, it gets old, it needs to be replaced, whatever it might be. The more luxuries you acquire, along with those luxuries, come complexity of life. So here's an argument, by the way. I'm not suggesting you should all become sannyasis. That's not where I'm going with this at all. But there is a value to relative simplicity. Relative simplicity means not to acquire more than you can really enjoy. What is that? People buy a house. In fact, my guru made a joke about this once. People who buy these big houses, big house with he actually made this statement. I don't recall the context, but he says, so-and-so, I heard of someone who just bought a house, 4 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. And he found that very odd. What are you... How can you have more bathrooms and bedrooms? How are you going to use? Anyway, that was his response, and that suggests having more complexity in your life than you truly need. You may need 5 bathrooms. I have no idea. I don't know how someone can need 5 bathrooms, but maybe. Okay, let's continue. Asha pasha shatar baddha, Asha pasha shatar baddha, Kama krodha parayana, Kama krodha parayana, Ihante kama bhogartam, Ihante kama bhogartam, Anyayenartha sanchayan, Anyayenartha sanchayan. Shri Krishna describes these people as Asha, Pasha, Shataihi, Baddhaha. They are Baddhaha, bound. Bound by what? Shataihi, hundreds of pasha, ropes, hundreds of ropes, but the ropes are a metaphor for what? Arsha, desire. Not hope here, desire. They're bound by the ropes of hundreds of desires. Another irony. What is contentment? Absence of desire, simply put, right? Contentment is absence of desire. The more desires you have, the less contentment you have. And further, one desire leads to another desire, leads to another desire, like that fire metaphor that Sri Krishna had given earlier in the Bhagavad Gita. This is the problem of desire. So these people are bound by hundreds of desires. These people meaning those with demonic traits, are kama, krodha, parayanaha. Their lives are dictated by kama, desire, and krodha, anger. These two always come as a pair, almost like two sides of a coin. Why? Wherever there's desire, there are obstacles to desire. And wherever there is a desire which is obstructed, there is krodha, anger. So two sides of a coin. And these people, what do? Ihante. They strive. Why do they strive? Kama, bhoga, artam. They strive for the sake of fulfilling their desires. And how do they strive? Anyayena artha sanchayan. Sri Krishna is a good study of human nature. So they strive, artha sanchayan, to accumulate. Artha here means wealth. They strive to accumulate wealth anyayena. Nyayena means righteously, rightly, correctly. Anyayena. Who cares if I'm breaking the law? Who cares? It's more important to accumulate wealth by any means. Anyayena means ignoring principles of dharma, to accumulate wealth by any means possible for the sake of fulfilling enjoyment. So Sri Krishna clearly understood the propensity of people to resort to adharma for the sake of fulfilling needs. And why? Raga and dvesha. I think we'll save the next verse for the next class. So just a final comment here. This all talks about the consequences of being compelled by raga dvesha. Likes and dislikes are not the problem. Everyone has likes and dislikes. I've commented several times on how my guru liked coffee. Does that mean he wasn't enlightened? Obviously not. He liked coffee. He was raised in South India, coffee country. So what does it mean to be enlightened? He had no raga or dvesha. If coffee wasn't available, that's fine. If tea wasn't available, let's see, his language was Tamil. So if coffee is not available, nalla. It's good. Tea is not available. Nalla. What nalla do they say? Nallada. Tamil is a complete mystery to me. And Swamiji, nothing's available. Rambanalla. Excellent, wonderful. This is enlightenment, where your contentment no longer depends on anything external. It's a complete absence of raga and dvesha, these inner compulsions. Okay, this is a great place to end our class. We have with the next verse, Sri Krishna takes a very different approach. You'll find it almost shocking in his depiction in his strong, vivid depiction of this problem of asura sampat. We'll see that next week. I'll remind you that tomorrow, Sunday, we have our usual Vedanta class at 10 o'clock. It's followed at 11 o'clock by satsang, so please come and join us for those sessions. We'll conclude with our brief prayers at the altar. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Havamahe Kaving Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Utabasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gururhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyoma Vadvyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanura Mardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.